The struggle between freedom and tyranny is not confined to any one nation or region. It is a global theme that, sadly, is becoming increasingly relevant in our time. Around the world, we are witnessing signs of a rising authoritarianism, along with a concerning suppression of human rights and civil liberties. Yet, we also see the courage of those who choose to resist it. The ongoing fight for democracy and dignity in Myanmar stands as a stark example of this global struggle, illuminating a shared human yearning for freedom, justice, and self-determination. In this way, their fight is everyone's fight. And so with that in mind, let's get into today's show. Emilie Palamy Pradichit, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on Insight Myanmar podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So we're going to get into your activist and advocacy work. In your case, your particular upbringing and early years had a direct relation and correspondence into what you ended up doing and what you're doing now. So as we start to tell the story of what you're involved in now and where it starts to intersect with Burma, if we could go back and talk about your early years and how that informed what you have got to since.
Sure. So I was born stateless, and I'm from a political refugee family from Laos. I was attached then to the political refugee status of my parents, and I was born in a refugee center in the south of France. I would say growing up as a stateless person, I became French. I was naturalized French when I was 12. We had to wait for my older sister to turn 18 to be able to become French. And I would say, growing up stateless, but also having the political refugee status, we obviously grew up in a very poor I had a poor background. My family wasn't wealthy. My parents separated when I was a child. So it was, my mother raising 3 children alone, all daughters, all girls. And so we saw our mother working a lot. We saw our neighbors as well working a lot. I was surrounded by migrants and refugees as well. And I eventually grew up in the suburbs of Paris, what we call La Banlieue, which is full of projects and, poor families, and all coming from very marginalized backgrounds. So when you're surrounded by people from lived experience who are living at the margin of society, at that time, I did not realize we were poor because everybody was poor. Mm-hmm. I think I started to realize that we were different when I started to help my neighbors. And I was a good student, so I was good at school, and my mother was working. So I was taking, my neighbors, and they were my babysitter at the same time, from North Africa and from Africa to City Hall to do paperwork, administration work, because they didn't know how to write and how to read. That's when I started facing inequalities and injustice. That's when I started seeing how the French administration staff, personnel, were talking to them, throwing papers at them, and really treating them like second-class citizens, no dignity, no. It was shocking, and it made me so angry. And then I started accompanying my family and my aunts and my mom, and I started seeing similar treatment. And I was like, what is it that people don't treat us equally because we are just not white, we are just not French? And I remember seeing my mom and my aunts, because we're from Laos, we're from Southeast Asia, we have always been told to be quiet, don't push back, be quiet, be kind, be nice, so you won't have any problems. And I'm like, but even if they are quiet, they still face the same discrimination. But then I would go with my neighbors, mothers from Africa, and I would see them pushing back. I would see them pushing back on the French administration, even though they couldn't speak good French. They were saying, you don't talk to me this way. You must respect my dignity. You must treat me as an equal human being. And for me, they were my heroes. I was like, wow, when I grew up, I want to be like them. I was like, oh, I wish my mom was like them. I wish my aunts were like them. I wish, and I always looked up to them, and I was like, they were so strong. And so that's how I became. I became very vocal as a child. I was always like pushing back on the French administration. And I knew that in order for us to leave the poverty status that we had, it was important for us to study. And it was important for my mom that we were good at school. So I understood that then education will be my weapon, to get out of this cycle of marginalization. And so I was good in school. I was also a good dancer. It took me to a high school in Paris. And from the dance high school in Paris, then I joined a law school. And then I studied law and international human rights law at the Sorbonne Law School. And then, I always knew that I would not stay in France. I grew up always knowing that I would not stay in France because I never felt French. I grew up when there was the suburbs in fire, when you have youth, from migrants' family who were burning cars because we were sick and tired of seeing inequalities. I think everybody was sick and tired of seeing the parents working for decades in France and, always being treated as second-class citizens, always having the lowest job. And I see my older sister generation being very good at school and facing discrimination and inequalities because they were just not French and white enough, to be able to get like manager's position or to be able to dream. And so I refused to have this experience, and I never stopped myself of dreaming. So I told myself that I saw myself defending people, not knowing what I would be, right? I didn't know if I would go to journalism, but my goal was always to tell the truth. I really wanted to tell the truth. And I ended up becoming a human rights lawyer.
So that's interesting to hear your background, where it's led you to what you're doing today and what you would turn into. With that in mind, I'm curious, when you think about the subject of identity and your identity, how would you describe it? What identity do you claim or describe yourself as?
I always get this question because I think for people, we live in a world that is very conditioned, and people always want to put us in boxes.
Sure.
And so I remember when I am in France, people see me as a foreigner, right? They see me as an Asian woman. Yeah. When I am abroad, because they hear my French accent, they see me as a French person. So it's always very funny. I'm going to tell you, I grew up in France, but I grew up in a very diverse community. And so I always felt like a citizen of this world. I always felt like, I'm global, but at the same time, I'm very loud because every time I went back home, I was in Laos. Like you're very much living in your Lao culture. I feel more Lao than French, definitely. People think that the way that I speak, because I'm very straightforward, and I push back a lot. People think it's because I'm French. No, it's not because I'm French. It's because I grew up surrounded by migrants and people from North Africa who pushed back against discrimination. That's where I'm getting it. It's not because I'm French. And so I see myself more Lao than anything else because I'm surrounded by Lao people and my family is Lao, obviously. And I think in terms of identity, it's fluid, it's very fluid. And I don't know how to describe it. When you have a dual identity and you live in different countries, because I also lived in the US when I was working there, you're just become a human being that is connected to people through the heart, through the soul, and we connect with people really, especially in the work that we do at Manushya. We connect on a soul level, we connect on a heart level. So you're not just one nationality or one citizenship, your identity is fluid, and you like I decide who I want to be, and I don't like when people try to categorize me. The other day I was in a UPR briefing for Laos, and one of the civil society representatives kept pushing to say that I am French. And I'm like, what's wrong with him? Like, who is he to tell me who I am, when it's about Laos and I'm invited as a Lao woman human rights defender, So I think I also represent a type of person that scares the world. when you're a refugee, but at the same time, then you get a citizenship and you're mixed and you're everything, and being so much can be scary for people.
Right. Now, looking at your upbringing in France, I know about and it's been well documented, that African immigrants that have been there, Arab and Muslim. I'm not so familiar with the Laotian and Southeast Asian community. So can you describe a bit of the context of how big this community was, what challenges they faced, and how they were integrated into French society?
The Southeast Asian community has always been seen as the good minority, because I think it's because of our mentality in Southeast Asia, and also because we're always being told to be narak, it's the same term in Thai, is narak, you need to be the good girl, the good minority, you don't push back. It was problematic for me, to be very honest with you, because we were poor. I grew up directly with surrounded by North Africans, and Muslims. We were a minority of Asians in those projects. Most of the Asian family were located they were living in houses. Mm-hmm. And I think this is the difference between being a migrant, an economic migrant, and being a political refugee. Most of the Southeast Asian people, be it Lao, Cambodian, Vietnamese, ending up in France, who are now part of the diaspora, were political refugees. Mm-hmm. A lot of them, our parents' generation, went to French schools. So they got educated, they got education. So they were able to enter the workforce better than people from North Africa and Africa. Whereas my neighbors were economic migrants, right? So it means that their parents fled the country to get a better life because they were peasants. Most of them don't know how to write and how to read. So they were obviously at the lowest position in terms of pyramid wealth. And so it was more difficult for them to enter the workforce. And because they also have a stronger personality, meaning that they push back, whereas Southeast Asians did not push back. Mm-hmm. So they have always been seen as the troublemakers, mm-hmm. whereas the Southeast Asians will always be seen as the good minority that know how to integrate. And to be very honest with you, it did bother me. Mm-hmm. It did bother me to see that because Southeast Asians were keeping their heads down in order for them to move forward, I didn't like it because I felt like they were betraying themselves. And also, when I got the French citizenship, most of the Southeast Asian, when we got the French citizenship, we were being asked to change our first name. So I was born Palamy. Palamy is my Lao name. And when we got the French citizenship, the people at City Hall told my mom, you should give them French first names. It will be easier for them to find a job. Mm-hmm. And my mom, she was like, oh, really? Then of course we're going to give them French first name without asking for my opinion, mm-hmm. without asking us if we were okay with it. And so from one day to the other, I became Emilie, but I grew up being Palamy. And then I got used to being called Emilie, but it was like, I'm now in France, I'm working towards getting my Lao name back in my identity papers, but just the erasure of my Lao name so that we could integrate better in French society, I found it so racist, and it was only told to Asians to do that, for them to be able to integrate better and not be like the Arabs or the Africans. Whereas when African and Arabic friends became French, once they got the citizenship, they were never invited to or encouraged to change the first name. And in a way, I always tell them, what is better for you? Because nobody's touching your identity. Nobody's changing your name. And I felt it as a violation, and I talk about it, with my mom, and I'm like, for her, she meant well, and she always thought that the people at City Hall meant well. But for me, it's a form of manipulation, discrimination, it's racism, it's very colonial, and I don't like it at all.
Right. That it's also interesting that as we talk about identity issues, one of the core of one's identity is one's name, and when one thinks of one's name, one thinks of ownership and agency in terms of what you call yourself and what other people refer to you as is really one of the primary identifications of who you are and how you present yourself to the world. So, this seems like it was at the core of determining who you were and who you were in this particular society and how this particular society also viewed you and where your agency was in all of that.
I always put Palamy in my signature and everywhere. I insist on it because it's my Lao name. I was born, Palamy, and I hope that I will get that name back in my identity documents. I have it in my refugee documents, right? But in my French documents, I don't have it. It had been erased. Like if you look at the document, I'll show you. Like they erased my name. You're like, wow.
Right. And so, at this early age, when you're seeing how French authorities are treating immigrants, migrants, people with less fluency, different color skin, maybe different background of religion and culture, and without so much of the background of knowing what to do, there's just this intrinsic sense that something is wrong and that you want to engage on the side of righteousness and truth. And then eventually through excelling in university and studies, you're able to find a background that's a professional background in your later years that's able to align with those early sediments and emotions that you saw when you were much younger. So tell us about what you then got into.
So I remember my first human rights job was with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Paris. I applied for an internship. They were looking for an intern to join the international organization department and the human rights team. So the team dealing with the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, dealing with human rights issues on a foreign level. And I remember I didn't have the background to apply, but I was like, I'm just gonna try. And the person who interviewed me, he's now the French ambassador to Cambodia. The person who interviewed me, he didn't ask anything about whether I had experience in human rights, because obviously I didn't have any work experience in human rights, but I had the human experience, And I remember he asked me questions about where do you live? How long does it take you to come here, to come to Paris? And like, it took me 1.5 hours because I live in the suburbs, but I've been doing that since I'm 15 years old, so I don't mind. And at that time, I think I was 25, 26. And it took me time, to finish my law degrees because I had to stop and I had to work in the meantime. I didn't have the luxury to do internships in any law firms. And he just asked about my life and my Lao background. And he's like, what, I can give you the internship. And everybody was shocked. They're like, why is he taking her? She has no human rights experience. Why her? And I gave my 100%. Like, seriously, I worked so hard. I gave my 100%. I learned so much from him. He was like pro-Tibet activist. He was inside the Foreign Affairs ministry, but he was like an activist heart, and he was so kind and so caring. And the last day of my work, he bought me a book from Stéphane Hessel. And it's Citoyens Sans Frontières, so it's Citizen Without Borders. He's like, you're gonna love this book because this book reminds me of you. And then he told me, I'm gonna tell you why I picked you. And because obviously he's the one who gave me he's the one who opened me the door to human rights work. And he said, I picked you because I grew up poor. I was the son of peasants in France, in Grenoble. And I went to Sciences Po Grenoble and nobody knew that I was poor. I was sleeping in trains. Like you, I could not do internships. During summer, during vacations, I had to work. And he was someone who was picking up the garbage, because he could work early and he could then study in the afternoon. He was sleeping in trains. He was very poor. He said, nobody knows about my life, that I struggled. And he said, when I passed the exam to enter the French Foreign Affairs, the first country that I was assigned to was Laos. He said, so when you came into the room and you're from Laos, he said, I knew it. I needed to give to you that chance.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's quite a story.
Yeah. I never told anyone.
And so that becomes the start of your involvement. Tell us what happened next and how you ended up growing.
So when I worked at the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I was working on France UPR review. So it was in 2008. I was working on the election of France to the UN Human Rights Council, so I had to trade votes, because it's a trading of votes, in order to get elected. we were running our campaigns, that we would be the country making the most UPR recommendations that the UPR review. That's how I started learning a lot about UN human rights mechanism, and that's how I started to become like an expert in UN human rights mechanism. And then after working at the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I wanted to pursue another degree, postgrad. So I did a postgrad specialized in human rights and international human rights organization. And from there, then I had to do a mandatory internship. I came to Thailand. I worked for Transparency International. I was shocked because the Thai chapter of Transparency International is pro-yellow shirt, so very conservative. And I'm like, oh, it's nothing about what I thought. It's like, oh, I'm working to basically protect the conservative. And then I also got an internship at the UN. That's a funny story because when I was doing my postgrad at the Sorbonne Law School, I was surrounded by kids who were from very wealthy families. The parents were ambassadors, or they were already working at the UN, at the World Bank and everything. And so we were only two French girls, from poor background. Everybody else were like foreigners coming from all around the world, kids of ambassadors. And when we had to find an internship, everybody already had the internship lined up by the parents. And we were like, oh, how are we going to do that? We don't know anyone. Our parents are like, poor. So I looked into publications at that time, UN publications, and I found the name of a woman. Her name is Mandip Dalewal. And she was heading a team at UNDP in New York, HIV and human rights. And I just emailed her. And because I knew that if I apply to the typical internship system, I will never get it. So I just emailed her. And same thing, she replied to me. And she interviewed me in April. I think it was 2009. And same thing, she doesn't ask much about my background. Like she sees my CV, she sees that I went to the Sorbonne Law School, she sees that I worked at the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I worked in Thailand. But she's more into my life. Like, how did you grow up? What about your parents? And same thing, so she asked me about my life, my dream, and she's like, okay, I'm gonna give you the internship. And so then I ended up being in New York, so I didn't have any money to go to New York. I got scholarship from the Sorbonne Law School. I was staying with friends of friends, in Queens, within the Thai Lao community. And after 6 months, my internship, she offered me a job. And then I worked at the UN for 6 years.
Wow.
And they sent me then here to Bangkok.
That's quite remarkable. So as you're going through this journey of your education and development, and also these kind of really fortuitous moments of being accepted by people who see something more and you see beyond your qualifications, and this is something I definitely personally identify with, some of the greatest things that have happened to me in life and my own opportunities, including my chance to go to Burma, and what led me to be there personally was from people also seeing more in me than just my paper qualifications represented. And once you're able to get in that way and people see that's something in you, which then in my position, probably like you, I also try to look beyond that as I'm looking at giving other people opportunities and bringing them in and working with them in the same way that I benefited like that. But in your case, as you're going from one activity to the next, and you have this passion from youth of really wanting to understand when marginalized communities are being affected and impacted in harmful ways, this leads to human rights. How is between your work experience and education, how is your own consciousness growing about what human rights is, how they're being violated, how different mechanisms can respond, and then maybe some of the limitations or frustrations in that response?
I started to use the language of human rights when I started to study human rights law. Before that, I did not use the language of human rights, right? So I used the language of dignity, I used the language of inequality, but I did not have the knowledge. I didn't take classes about international human rights law. So I was really unaware of how to seek justice using international human rights law, but it was more about seeing inequalities and the language of humans that we were using growing up. And also was disturbed by, discrimination and stigma among communities. I my mom is half Lao and half French. Her mother, my mother's family is actually from Thabon, Nong Khai in Thailand. And my mom was born during the Indochine War. Her mother used to be a sex worker, crossing the border every day from Thabon to Vientiane because the clients were there. And eventually she stayed there and she met my mother's father, who was a French soldier. That's how my mother was born. And so I grew up, hearing stories about my grandmother being a bad woman. And every time I would come to Thailand and I would come visit Thailand, I would see how when I speak Lao, people react to me. And I see, like, how come everybody in my family, they are from Isan, the northeastern region of Thailand. They're from Thabon, Nong Khai, Isan. And they ended up being maids, like, taxi drivers or domestic workers because they didn't go to school. So, of course, I understood that my grandmother was trying to get a better life for her and her family. But I saw also women from Laos and from Isan also being sex workers in Thailand. And I think what shocked me the most is when I saw children. Because, the first time I came to Thailand was like so long ago that you could see pedophilia in the street. And I was so shocked that I remember it motivated me. That's the moment when I was like, I'm going to study human rights. Because I told you I didn't know what to study. But I was in law school, but I didn't know what I would do. When I came to Thailand and I saw the discrimination that my family was facing because they were people from Isan, and I saw how people will react to me the second I speak Lao, like, oh, why you speak the language of the poor? I got, why you speak the language of the poor? Or you cannot be Lao. Lao people are stupid. Or you cannot be Lao. Lao people are so ugly. And I was like, what's wrong with Thai people? That's when I see that's when I was like, what I experienced in France, it's exactly the same here. It's not only about the color of your skin, but it's about the class system, It's about people in power always having to step down on people who are poor and making sure that they stay at the margin of society. And so that's really then when I went back to France, because, when I went back to France, I really specialized in human rights. I'm like, I need to learn about human rights law because I need to denounce that at the international level. And then that's when I was like, oh, I need to end up at the UN, because when you study international human rights law, people make you believe that if you want to change the world, you need to end up at the UN. But it's really when I came to Thailand that I had the click of, okay, it's actually human rights law that I need to study if I want to be able to denounce what's happening to my family, to my community, to people from Isan. That's really what gave me the will inside that it must be human rights.
That's really interesting. It almost sounds like you had to go through a translation process of having these emotions and thoughts and feelings to a situation that you were witnessing, but emotions and thoughts and feelings aren't things that you can just express in a formal setting and require change or point out abuses. You need to, there's some translation process of being able to know just simply what nomenclature to use, what terminology to be able to employ to see these things that you're feeling and witnessing, but putting them in that legal context and in that framework, and learning how to transition into that technical field of operations. So that leads you then to want to study international human rights law. How was that experience like? Did you find that empowering? Was it, were there parts about it that were frustrating or that didn't match up to what you were looking at? Or what was that experience of actually going and doing it?
I'm going to be very honest with you. I didn't like law school. I didn't like studying, but I was forced. I had to do it, like following the conditioning, the matrix, like everybody, needing to have the degree. I was always thinking, how is it going to be useful? Like if tomorrow I go to Laos or I go to Thailand, how is it going to be useful, everything that I'm learning now? Because it's very theory. We are staying in the theory, But I was studying because I had no choice. And I didn't know how it would translate on the ground. I only knew that get your degree, try to get into the UN. Get your degree and try to get into the UN. So that's what I did. Got my degree, tried to get into the UN. I got into the UN. And I was like, oh, finally I made it. I'm in New York and wow, I'm working at the UN. I'm going to change the world. It's very naive because at that time I didn't realize it was naive. But then I had this huge moment of disillusion. Because when you're coming from a poor background, refugee background, and you end up at the UN, you see a lot of people from the global south, and you're like, wow, finally I'm at the right place. Everybody's from all around the world. We're going to change the world together. And then you're faced again with the same issue. Class system. People born with privileges, or the people in power, or the people leading the world. And I was like, wow, I met like the people who always gave me the chance to enter, be it the French government or the UN, were people who had a background similar than me. But then once you enter the institution, I was surrounded by a lot of people with privileges, and I felt disconnected. I was in my late 20s. I told you when I was 27. I was in my late 20s, and I was living my best life in New York, right? But at the same time, I felt totally disconnected from my roots and who I was. So I was learning a lot. I learned so much from my mentors, Mandeep and Vivek. Vivek Divan is an amazing human rights lawyer from India who challenged, Section 377 at the New Delhi court. I learned so much from him, and I learned so much as well from Mandeep. And I love the work that I was doing, but I was sitting in headquarters. I didn't know what it was like on the ground. I was like, but everything that I am doing, I was working on HIV. I was working on the Global Commission on HIV and the law. We were looking at how HIV-related criminal laws, but also how the criminalization of homosexuality, of sex work, of drug users is actually having a negative impact. And it's actually spreading HIV among key populations. So it was very niche, and I learned so much, but I didn't know how effective we were on the ground. I was just at the global level working with high-level people, former head of states in that commission. So I learned a lot. But then I wanted to experience what is it on the ground? What is actually the UN doing on the ground? Because I know we receive so much funding, but who are we giving it to? And so when I came to Bangkok, I was still working on the same issue, LGBT rights, HIV human rights. And when I saw the way we were working on the ground, I was very disappointed. I never felt so disconnected. In New York, I could not see that much disconnection because I was in my bubble. But when I came here, I was totally disappointed. I was like, okay, so we have to fund. I was disgusted by the way, as the UN, we have to fundraise so much. We are receiving so much money from governments, and how we are writing proposals saying that we are going to build the capacity, of local groups on the ground, how we are going to grant them a huge amount of money for them to be able to do the work. And then once you get the money, you're being told, change the proposal, and you need to explain that they actually don't have the capacity, so we need to retain the funds in-house so that we can save jobs in-house. And I was like, why are we doing that? Or when we were doing meetings, I always felt that we were so fake, having to always bring people for representation matters. Oh, we need an indigenous woman. Oh, we need a community member. Oh, we need a transgender activist. It was always focusing on ticking the box of representation rather than bringing real change. It was just we need to organize this dialogue and this meeting. We need to make sure we have all the civil society. We need to show that we are doing all those great dialogues and work. But I was like, but where is the impact on the ground? And where is the money going? And every time the money was always going to the NGO that would speak English. But we have no guarantee that NGO then will give it back on the ground. I felt so disconnected. And I'm like, you know what? All my dreams that I had as a child growing up surrounded by migrants or refugees with this poor background, I'm now at the UN where I thought I would have the power to have an impact on the ground. We have zero impact. Everything that we do it's an intergovernmental organization. So I was like, in the end of the day, I'm not having any impact. It was very frustrating. I felt that I was betraying myself. I felt that it was very fake, and I felt that it was so colonial. I still see myself speaking Lao at the UN here. I was speaking with the cleaning ladies and the people in the kitchen. They're all from Isan, so I speak Lao to them. And I would see the face of my Thai colleagues, from the high so elite, ending up at the UN and looking at me like, why do you talk to them? Or saying that I don't speak good Thai. And I'm like, but I'm not speaking Thai, I'm speaking Lao, And I didn't like that. I truly didn't like that. I hate the class system here in Thailand. I have challenges experiencing it. I have challenges seeing how the human rights field is being shaped, by people from the elite, how people from other regions were invisible. So it was really important for me that if I'm going to stay here and if I really want to live my dream at that time, it's like, remember when I came and I was young, I saw the discrimination against Isan people. I was like, I need to go back to my dream. And so it was important that I leave the UN in order to live my dream and to open Manushya.
Yeah, that's really bold, and it's also, I think it takes bravery to have worked so hard to achieve where you think you need to get, which is no small thing, law school and the UN and in that position, and then realizing that essentially you can't work within the system. I mean, that's an essential question for every activist. You work within the system or outside the system. And I think for different systems, there's a different analysis there, a different calculus. It's not like there's always one thing is right. But in your particular case, you're trying to work within the system and you've spent your whole life and livelihood up to that point. And then you have to look in the mirror and realize that you can't legitimately work in the system the way that you want. So you leave there and you strike out on your own. And tell us what organization you set up and the values that went into the creation of that.
Before opening Manushya, I joined an NGO because I was like, okay, I'm going to switch from the UN to the NGO world. And so I joined UPR-Info and I opened up the Asia regional office. And that's when then I met all the Burmese amazing activists that I met. It was through the work that I was doing at UPR-Info. So I opened the regional office in 2015, and it was open until the end of 2016. I met amazing people, but again, I was like, okay, I'm working for this NGO that is trying to expand. Why are we trying to expand? Why? I thought the goal was to build the capacity of grassroots and local groups for them to keep doing the work. Right. Why am I asked to expand? And challenges you with, patriarchy and being led by two white men that were very patriarchal didn't match. So I was like, why am I, again, killing myself, working for others, opening stuff for others, and I'm still unhappy? The NGO is not being as well as the UN, and in the end of the day, it's a mini UN. So you know what just you don't open your own thing to live your own dream. And so I opened Manushya in 2017 as a feminist intersectional human rights organization, also using a decolonial lens, really working with marginalized communities on the ground. And Manushya means human being in Sanskrit. And the name Manushya came because, when I was working with UPR-Info, I was meeting a lot with indigenous women, migrant women, refugees also from Burma. And every time we would do a cycle at the end of the workshop, they were telling me, I feel treated as an equal human being. And I was like, oh my gosh, this term human being, equal human being, keep coming back since I'm a child. That's also what I heard, growing up with my neighbors, pushing back on the French administration and saying, you must respect us as equal human being. Like, I keep hearing this name human being. So then the name Manushya was obvious that it had to be named Manushya, human being.
That's great. So you describe setting up Manushya as a feminist, intersectional human rights organization that was decolonized. I think these are impactful words, and different people might carry different meanings with them. So I'd like to ask you to take this phrase either as a chunk or as individual words and to unpack the meaning that you're deriving from them in using these words intentionally to describe the work you're doing, just so listeners can better understand your intentions and your deliberation on what you're trying to do in the direction you're going.
Feminist organization. I'm a woman and I evolved in a very patriarchal field. When I was at UNDP, my leader was a woman, right? But when I joined the NGO field and I started working in Thailand, I was faced with so much patriarchy. I was like, why are all the head of NGOs or leaders or the ones speaking or invited to speak everywhere, be it at the FCCT or or diplomatic briefings, why are they all white men? And why the Thai women are the coordinators and the one implementing the work, but why all the leadership is led by men? Why is that? There's not good enough Asians in our region to lead the work. So that was my first shock, and the second shock was, so the first shock was seeing all those older white men leading the work. And the second shock was that there's not enough good Asian. And the third shock was that where are all the women? They were at the coordinator and lower positions. Like, why are we not allowed to dream that we can open our own thing and we can lead our own work? So it was very important for me to have a feminist, woman-led organization. It was to make a point, sick and tired of being told by men what to do. Sick and tired of being pushed back by older white men. And, instead of creating space for us, they just want to keep us below them. And I'm like, I don't want that. And also my experience, working for UPR-Info, that's also very much how I felt working for those men. I'm like, no, I must open a feminist organization that is woman-led, and we are going to prioritize hiring women and put women in leadership position. Intersectional, it's because I grew up in a very intersectional environment, right? So you carry several identity. You are a woman from a marginalized community. So you're like living the struggle within the struggle. And not only you're a woman from working class, but from a refugee or migrant background. And so I grew up being very intersectional, in a very intersectional world. And I realized that when I was living that intersectional world, I was faced with discrimination, inequality, racism. And I'm like, I want to have an organization that will be intersectional, where we will embrace people coming from everywhere. You can be from the LGBT community, but you want to work on human rights. You can be from any background, but we have the same shared vision, which is to power people from the ground to be at the forefront of the human rights field, be it on digital rights, on climate justice, or access to justice before the UN. But it has to be from a feminist lens, it has to be intersectional. Especially because, when I started working in human rights, I saw a field that was not intersectional. It was either you're working on civil and physical rights, or either you're working on economic, social, and cultural rights. I saw people fighting in the region, like, oh no, civil and physical rights are more important, freedom of expression is more important than climate justice.
Right.
And I was like, but human rights are interrelated.
Yeah.
There's no one right that is more important than the other. And when you are coming from a poor background, all human rights are important for you, And especially you're also looking at economic, social, and cultural rights when you're poor, because you need to be able to access education. You need to be able to access social services, social security. Your economic and cultural rights are so important. When you're coming from a wealthy background, you don't have issues with economic, social, and cultural rights. So you will focus on civil and physical rights. So if you look at the human rights landscape and human rights NGOs and who is working where, that's where you will see who has gotten a wealthy or privileged background, most likely will be working on civil and physical rights, and who is coming from a poor background will be working on economic, social, and cultural rights. That's the reality that I had to face when I came to Thailand, when I saw the human rights landscape. And I really made it a point that we will be intersectional and we are not going to focus on just one human rights. And when we're engaging on UN human rights mechanism, we will build coalitions where we will bring people together, working on all those human rights together, for them not to fight. Because when you work on the UPR or treaty body reviews, I was like, why are people fighting? Why are people fighting to make the right more important than the other? So it was important for me to have this intersectional approach where all human rights are equal and where people from all backgrounds, diverse backgrounds, are equal. And decolonial. Decolonial is very important for me. And I think people in Thailand were not understanding what I talked about when I talked about, to stop, top-down approaches. When I was talking about first I was using bottom-up approaches because I realized that decolonial or decolonization was such a strong word for people here, and they would not connect because Thailand has never been formally colonized. But I was like, but the mindset is pretty much colonized, I was like, I'm surrounded by people who are here to serve foreigners and who are here to serve a foreign agenda, where the more elite you are, the more you will be so proud to be validated by a white person working in this field. I was like, there's something wrong about that. Same thing when I was at the UN, I was like, why are all the national staff like under a manager who is white. And I was like, there's something wrong within the UN where you have all those foreigners coming to regional offices or country offices who are from the Western world, the global minority, and then you have all the global majority staff. Even though the global majority staff are from the elite, just that perspective, I found it so colonial, you know? And then when you're on the ground, it's a class system. And so I use the word decolonial in the way that we're talking about power, and it's how we're going to shift the power from giving the power back to the people from lived experience, because the people from lived experience are the ones who need to lead the work. I'm myself from lived experience. And until I never told my story before, and I was attacked by people from the elite. You know, people from the elite, they were so scared of seeing me. I was attacked from being a white supremacist. I was like, I don't understand why they call me a white supremacist when they are the ones bowing down to white people. I'm like, why are you calling me a white supremacist? And then I was discriminated against because I'm a woman. And I'm a feminine woman. And so for them, it was like, she's not smart. She's not a real human rights lawyer. She's getting funding because she's flirting with donors. Like, you know, I have all those attacks against me. And I'm like, all those attacks are coming from people from the elite because they are scared of what they don't know. Until the day I told my story. And the day I told my story, people started to leave me alone. And then they started attacking me about my character because I pushed back. I have a big mouth. I don't let people control me. And I push back when I see that people are going too far in the way that they want us to be below them in the field. And so decolonial is very important for me because it's very important for the global majority to stand up. And it's very important for the global majority to lead the work in the global majority world. It's very important for people from lived experience to be the ones leading the human rights work. I think it was okay for years to have the elite being there, but now that you have people from lived experience having access to education, having access to the workforce and to the human rights field, it's important for the global majority and from the people from lived experience, the working class, to be able to lead this work. So for me, decolonial means the power imbalances between global majority and global minority, but also decolonial for me also means mobilizing the working class so that the people from the working class and lived experience are the ones leading the work in the human rights field.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Now, in your description, you referenced how the intersectional approach that you're taking, that you're not wanting to silo these different issues into their own categories and work on them independently, but to, in your words, to see some of the issues through a feminist lens. And if we break down even the definition and the cultural meanings and historical definitions of feminism, you've also done work in identifying where the Western imposed and Western generated definitions of feminism, when and how it came up for a Western context, are sometimes have to be modified and adjusted as they move from the global north to the global south. And so I wonder if you can also break down where and how you would define feminism and its Western origins, and then as it gets translated and applied best to this context, again, by those people on the ground who know best and who have their hands in the issues, what kinds of changes you have to make during that transition?
So I studied in France. And I studied in France, and then I worked at the UN. And so I would say I was surrounded by white feminism. White feminism means that you will have white women talking about feminism and talking about women's issues and being the voice of other women and feminists from the global south. They're also the ones deciding who gets to speak and creating those spaces for women from the global majority to speak. And there's also this perception of being a good woman. So white feminism also have this perception of you're a good woman. So for white feminism, there's no sex work. It's all about prostitution or sexual exploitation. So there's this vision of, whoever enters sex work is a bad woman. And so working in the global north and studying in global north settings, it was weird because it makes you being judgmental, I was judgmental as well. I was judgmental of my grandmother you know, who was a sex worker. I was judgmental of when I came here, all the women doing sex work. At first, I was judgmental until I get to know them, you know, until you get to see all these inequalities and you see how it's people in power in the privileged world, like making sure that poor people don't know better and don't get better. And so it was really important for me when I really tapped deeper to understand my grandmother and to understand the people I'm working with. And when I started working on HIV and human rights, I started working for the rights of sex workers. I was like, there's something wrong, you know, with how the global minority world is defining what is a woman. And also, I was working with transgender women and transgender activists. And, you know, for a lot of white feminism, transgender women are not women. So they would exclude them, you know, from the room, or they would exclude lesbian women of color. And so I was like, okay, in the work that I'm going to do here at Manushya, I will not replicate what white feminists have done. And we will define on our own terms what is feminism for us from a global South perspective, a woman working with us. And I can tell you, like, I had interns, you know, coming from France. I had interns coming from the global North. When they come working with us, I don't know what's happening in their mind. They think that they're going to become the boss of the Thai. They think they're going to become the boss of the global majority just because they got a better education or they speak better English. And I'm like, what is wrong in people's mind that they think that they're going to become the boss? First, they come with a white savior behavior. Like, I'm here to save you. I'm here to help you. Like, I'm so grateful to be here. I'm saving you. And then once they've been here for a long time, then they think they're going to become the boss right away. And I'm like, what is wrong in the mind that makes them think this way? That's something I will never be able to comprehend. I can just observe and be like, this needs to stop. And it can only be stopped when you build your own organization to fight against that. And so it was important for me to have a feminist organization from the global South where we talk about collective liberation, when we move away from individualism and move into the collective, when we really understand that whatever foreign agenda is coming to the region, we need to push back. So, for example, the French and the Swedish, they criminalize sex work, but they criminalize the client because for them, you know, a sex worker is a bad woman. It's pushing back against that. Even within the UN system, when you look at the CEDAW committee members, the CEDAW committee, in the decisions that they make, in the concrete observations that they make, they still use the word prostitution because of the CEDAW committee members comprising women from elite backgrounds, you know, and white feminism. It's for us to dismantle all of that. And I really resonate with Audre Lorde because she was among the first one, you know, back in 1979 at the sex conference in New York, when she made that speech about the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Look, we are in 2025. Everything she says in that speech denouncing white feminism, denouncing how indigenous women of color, trans women are being excluded or are being tokenized and call on last minute to fill the box or tick the box of they have been invited to the meeting. Everything that she says about white feminists scared of losing their privileges and still enjoying the master's tools, so they will never change the master's house. Everything that she says in that speech back in 2079 still resonates so much today in 2025, and even more when we see how the world is becoming more and more fascist and more against feminism. And so it's so important for more and more women and for more younger generation to really be able to dream and define the world that we want to live in. And we shouldn't be scared of speaking up, and we shouldn't be scared of opening our own thing, you know. We shouldn't be ashamed, or we shouldn't be felt little, because people in power and people from privileged background will always make you believe that because you grew up poor, you cannot. But we can. So, and we should always.
That's great. So you've given our listeners a great context for understanding your personal story, how that then integrates into your educational and professional and activist intentions leading to the founding of Manushya and your methodology, ideology, and what you're trying to do. I think this gives us a really good framework for beginning to talk about some of your Myanmar work. So you mentioned first encountering Burmese activists in UPR. So if you could take us through when you started to be aware of the incredibly complex dynamics that were going on in Myanmar, when you started to approach that, and then as Manushya started to also become involved in Myanmar.
So when I was the Asia director of UPR Info, in 2015, Myanmar was going through its UPR review in November 2015. So my role was to make sure that we engage with Burmese activists so they know about the UPR process, so they can influence the UPR outcome, they can lobby diplomats, and they can come to Geneva as well. And I remember I wrote to Elise Thier at that time. I forgot where she was working, but we did the same postgrad at the Sorbonne Law School. And I told her, hey, like, I need to be in touch with Burmese activists. Do you know anyone? And she's like, yeah, of course. I know Kin Omar, I know Aung Myo Min. I'll put you in touch with them. And I think she had worked with Kin Omar before. And me, I did some research and I was like, oh my gosh, these are big names. Without realizing how big they are, and so I was really new, to Burma work. And for me, I was like, okay, so I'm going to meet Burmese activists and we're going to talk about the UPR process and how they can engage. And so she puts me in touch with Kin Omar and she puts me in touch with Aung Myo Min. At that time, Kin Omar was heading, Burma Partnership, and Aung Myo Min was heading Equality Myanmar. And so I get in touch with them, and then I understand that Kin Omar is staying in Mesot and cannot go inside, and then Aung Myo Min was inside. So Myo was like, hey, why don't you come? I'm organizing a UPR workshop. Why don't you come? You give us a UPR training. You explain to us the timeline and how we can engage with UPR Info and with you. I'm like, sure. So I felt very, very welcomed, so I go to Yangon. I meet with Mio and other activists, and I explain to them this is the UPR process. We'll have to do fact sheets. We'll have to lobby. They had already submitted the UPR submission back then, and so I was focusing on the lobbying with diplomats. And then when I went to Yangon, I meet with Wewenu, and I understand that she's a prominent Rohingya activist, former political prisoner. And I see a strange dynamic where she's very welcomed by Aung Myo Min, but some people in the room are like, don't want to engage on Rohingya issues. Mm-hmm. And I was shocked because coming from a marginalized background, entering into the human rights field, I was so naive to think that everybody would embrace Rohingya issues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this was the issue then.
Mm-hmm. And it was 2015, and remember, the country had just opened up in 2012.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people were still, trying to position themselves and still trying to be with the majority. And I could not understand. For me, the majority would be like, you must embrace Rohingya issues, And we're talking about, okay, we're going to do UPR fact sheets. What are the issues that are going to be represented in the UPR fact sheets? Who is going to lobby with diplomats in Yangon, in Bangkok, and in Geneva? And there was this whole drama about why shall we include Rohingya issues? And I'm like, are you serious? And I think I was so shocked, and I could not understand what was happening, And I had not studied well enough, the Rohingya issues. And obviously, I was listening to what we was explaining about the citizenship law and, what was happening in Rakhine State. But I could not understand the hate that some of the Burmese activists in Yangon had against Rohingya people. It was all based on religion, all based on identity. And I'm like, how can you be a human rights activist and exclude Rohingya people? But it was shocking to witness this, but at the same time, it was amazing to see the leadership of Myo, saying we are inclusive, so obviously Rohingya issues will be included. And because, of who he is and his leadership, then people just follow. I also met a woman from WLB, so I met a lot of people, Wakushi, amazing activists, and so I was very fortunate to meet a lot of very well-known Burmese activists back in 2015. And I remember they were sharing with me, a struggle. They were like, you know, the country opened up. For years, we relied on INGOs to do the advocacy for us. The last UPR in 2011, most of the advocacy was done by INGOs, so foreigners, because we were still living in hiding. Not all of us were back in Myanmar. Some of us were still in Chiang Mai and Mesot. But now that a lot of us are back in Myanmar, we want to be the one leading the UPR advocacy. I'm like, sure. I think that's when I started to realize that there was this confrontation between INGOs and local groups, you know, and the fight for space and the fight for representation. And that's why then it became even more important to have this decolonial approach with Manushya. And I was like, sure, let's create the space. And for me, it was obvious that the people who need to lobby, diplomats, are the locals or the Burmese and not the INGOs. But at the same time, I was approached by the INGOs. And then I was like, the NGOs are telling me, oh, we're going to organize a diplomatic briefing at the Canadian embassy. I was like, oh, who's going to speak? And it was like just INGOs. And I was wondering, what's happening? Like, you know, I was very naive, because when I left the UN to join the NGO world, I thought that the NGO world was like Alice in Wonderland, you know? And I was like, oh my gosh, this is actually so nasty. You have this huge contradiction between what is in your heart and what you're supposed to do, and then what's happening on the ground, and how you still have a lot of neocolonialism going on. And I'm like, I understand that Burma was so close for so many years that there was this reliance on INGOs to do the lobbying.
Yeah.
I can understand how it's difficult for INGOs to let go of their power. It's in the end of the day always a power struggle. And I can understand that everybody's trying to survive and trying to justify their relevance in terms of funding, in terms of impact to donors. I get it. But what I don't understand is, why don't you understand it's time for you to let go? Why don't you understand that it's time for you to step back and create the space for those who actually came back to inside the country, the ones who actually were hiding in jungles, you know, the 88 generation, the brave ones who are coming back to change things inside the country, to build the capacity of the new generation, to build that, you know, revolution inside. Why don't you understand that they are the ones who need to lead? And I think it's because I'm not white that I have this understanding, but like, I don't want to sound anti-white or racist when I say that. It's just that because I'm Asian and I'm coming from a marginalized background, there are things that I see that I don't understand. How do people think in their mind? So it was very challenging for me to comprehend what was happening. But it was obvious for me that my heart was with the Burmese group, and that I had to do everything in my power to create that space for them, to make sure that they are the ones speaking to diplomats and they are the ones going to Geneva. So that's what we did then with Mio and Omar, because Mio and Omar are the leaders of the Burma-Myanmar UPR Forum. And it was clear that working with them was mind-blowing. I learned a lot from them, the leadership, how they are bringing people together, how they're also compromising, you know, and how they are also putting boundaries and standing strong on their values, being like, if you want to be part of this forum, then you will have to accept the fact that Wewenu is with us, you know, and Rohingya issues will be included. So I learned a lot from them. I was like looking up to them. They were very inspiring. I became very close friend with Wewe, because, you know, we are not far away in terms of age. And yeah, then we embarked on a journey where we did fundraising, found funding to do lobbying in Yangon and in Bangkok. So we held diplomatic briefings in Yangon, and then we held diplomatic briefings in Bangkok. So we brought the members of the Burma-Myanmar UPR Forum in Bangkok, and then we selected a few of them and brought them to Geneva for the UPR Info pre-session, and it was a success. It was amazing to be working with them, to see the power, you know, of solidarity, and to see, all of them standing strong on Burma issues, really leveraging the UPR process as this political tool that is going to bring solidarity among them, and really showing to the world that this is the Burma-Myanmar that we want, a country where people stand in solidarity, where people are inclusive, and where Rohingya issues are as well included. So I felt very fortunate and very blessed to be able to work with the Burma-Myanmar UPR Forum, and it will always stay with me. It was my first experience working with a UPR coalition. accompanying them through the UPR journey, and then we continue working together on the UPR implementation afterwards.
So it's interesting describing going there and finding that even among the human rights community, there's this marginalization taking place, and that's well documented. You know, I'm thinking of past episodes that we've had former U.S. Ambassador Scott Marcial referencing lifelong activists and anti-military advocates that during that space were uncomfortable with also including Rohingya. That was very shocking and disappointing to him. Or Elliot Prase-Freeman, the academic who's written about how human rights has been seen as something of a zero-sum game in Myanmar, and that you have to get your rights before that fellow gets theirs, and the Rohingya need to be last in line. So, you know, they only if there's some left over. So this kind of mentality and this kind of thinking. And I'm also, to unpack it further, I'm wondering where exactly you find this colonial mindset setting in, because another way to see this is that you have this Burmanization and you have this Bamar superiority that continues being a talking point to this day. To what extent are the Bamar seeing and recognizing and including those from historically marginalized backgrounds? And I think one can definitely look at the British colonial hangover in terms of the ways that they scattered identities and drew lines and certainly some of the oppressive features of the Burmese military can be traced back to old British laws, or the Four Cuts, some of the so-called pacification campaigns in the late 19th century. There's some parallels there. But also there, one can go back and look at the expansionist Bamar kingdoms in the pre-colonial times, and then in the post-colonial times, the just pure racism that and superiority that some Bamar military leaders and elites and authorities had. And I think even in the parliamentary democracy that there, UNU or Aung San, there's questions of to what degree were they really open and inclusive, and maybe to some degree this is a bit unfair to look at today, because you could look at American leaders from 50 years ago, and if you apply modern lens, then they're not going to quite hold up the same way. But it's just to go in, just to kind of have these kind of competing forces, and maybe there's some correlation and counter influence as well of the Bamar sense of superiority and Burmanization, and then this decolonization that's also taking place. So where do you see that relationship, and how would you unpack how this exclusion of Rohingya was being impacted by one or both of these influences simultaneously?
When I started working with Burmese activists and the Burma-Myanmar UPR Forum, we need to remember that at that time, everybody was a huge fan of Aung San Suu Kyi, including the Rohingya activists. And so there was this dream that, she would be free, she would bring freedom to the country, and she would unify everyone. And then I see the transition. I see once she came into power with the NLD, and I see that she was not embracing diversity. And as a leader, she holds a lot of responsibility on the way Rohingya have been treated. If only she had been inclusive, if only she had treated Rohingya people as equal human beings in Myanmar, Burma, as indigenous people of Myanmar, Burma, they wouldn't have been a genocide, And I think she holds a huge responsibility. And I try to understand, I was so sad to see my Burmese friends and to see Wei Winu, looking up to her and having so much hope and seeing that, she's actually excluding them. And when you look back, you're like, oh, but she's from the elite. Again, it's a class system struggle. It's, again, people from the elite, people from privileged background who will always look down on people who are different. Rohingya are from the Muslim community, the majority is Buddhist. And so there is this need to really keep the rich and the establishment in power and above others. I think people in power and privilege, they have a huge difficulty to see themselves as equal human beings. And so it was this huge disappointment of seeing how the NLD was was moving forward, and to see Aung San Suu Kyi not embracing Rohingya issues when you had all the Rohingya activists who always stood in solidarity with her, you know? Did she even look back at them? Did she even acknowledge that they are a huge part of her win, of her success? So I felt hurt for them. So, you know, when I opened Manushya, and when I saw then, because of her leadership, she divided even more Burmese people among the human rights field, because the huge fan of her and then supporters of GNLD, and like, we need to work with them, then had no issue separating themselves from the Rohingya issues. And on top of that, then, you know, you have all the hate speech that was proliferating on Facebook, you know, that also further enabled hate speech and discrimination, and then ended up in the genocide of the Rohingya people on the ground. So you have Aung San Suu Kyi responsibility, excluding Rohingya people, plus the responsibility of Facebook enabling a genocide. Both of them, like, really thrilling into the hate speech and the further marginalization and exclusion of Rohingya people. It was obvious for me that with Manushya, we are going to focus on Rohingya issues. If we need to stand in solidarity with one group, it would be the Rohingya people of Myanmar. And that's what we've been doing since I opened Manushya, is that all the work that we do on digital rights, it's in support of Rohingya people. All the work that we do when it comes to solidarity building, women's rights and feminism, it's in solidarity with Rohingya women. It was obvious that because of, I opened in 2017, you know, when the genocide was happening, when Facebook was being used as a tool for hate speech against Rohingya people in Myanmar, it was obvious for me then there was no other choice. It was obvious that we need to stand in solidarity with the Rohingya people. We need to stand in solidarity with Rohingya women. There was no other choice.
Right. And so as you developed a strategy for working with Rohingya, and especially Rohingya women, and especially with the kind of online hate and propaganda that was being waged against them, what shape did that take as you started to build this network and build these programs around this activity?
So when we work on online freedom and digital rights, we built a regional coalition. It's called the ASEAN Regional Coalition to Stop Digital Dictatorship. And so as part of this coalition, we have Burmese members. So we have the Women Peace Network, led by Wei Wenu. We have ASEAN Burma, led by Debbie Sohart. And we have the Rohingya Women Collaborative Network, led by Yasmin and Noor Ziza. And so Rohingya-led or Rohingya supportive. It was obvious for us that these would be the Burmese members, because we wanted to make sure that the work that we do when it comes to online freedom, and when we are denouncing, you know, the digital coup, the coup that happened in Myanmar in 2021, that also is a digital coup, that the people, the voices leading the work of Rohingya women. So it was critical for us to include them in the coalition, and to make sure that they are the ones leading the digital rights field work on Burma, and not the traditional Burmese digital rights activists that may not be inclusive of Rohingya issues. You know, you cannot talk about digital rights in Myanmar without talking about the hate speech against Rohingya people. Yeah. And if you look at people working on digital rights, they will focus on internet shutdown, which is legitimate because of the digital coup that happened. They will focus on internet shutdown and internet disruption, especially because Burma is the country that experienced the most internet shutdown, you know, for example, just in 2024. But if you're truly inclusive, intersectional, and working on digital rights, you cannot ignore the hate speech going on our platforms against the Rohingya people. And because not everybody is brave enough to do it, we're like, in our coalition, when we talk about Rohingya issues, when we talk about Burmese issues, we're going to talk about hate speech against Rohingya. So it was critical. That's why we are working with the Rohingya Women Collaborative Network and the Women Peace Network and ASEAN Burma to document the hate speech against Rohingya people that is happening in Indonesia, in Malaysia. And that's why also when we are resourcing human rights defenders and human rights activists, it was important for us to give a grant to the Rohingya Women Collaborative Network for them to be able to document that, but for them to be able to provide life savings services to Rohingya women who were escaping and arrived in Aceh, Indonesia, and then faced rape there, you know. So again, it's very important for us to prioritize Rohingya people in the work that we do, be it on the digital platform or on the grants that we give, rapid response grant or strategic grants to sustain movements. It's important to support Rohingya movements. It's important to provide them with the necessary grants for them to build the movements, sustain the movements, to be able to be visible, because we need them to be visible. We need them to be heard and to be seen. The world needs to know about what's happening against the Rohingya population in the world, and the world needs to stop seeing them as just a minority and a Burmese issue. It's a global issue. There's a genocide against the Rohingya population, and we need to stand in solidarity with them and do whatever we can to really make sure that the world is supporting the work that they do.
Mm-hmm. Now, just as you were doing work to break down feminism as it came from Western contexts into what was relevant for you at this time, I guess we could say a Laos in French that was in Thailand, and make it relevant for your context there. You're now working with Rohingya women, and so I'm wondering if, as you're working with supporting them and wanting to hear from them, because so much of your past, professional as well as personal, is really wanting to hear from those people on the ground and to be listening and supporting more than you're talking and lecturing. And so Rohingya women also have a different background, culture, religion, upbringing from you, even though it's a similar region in terms of geography, it is quite different in terms of their community. And so was there an effort to learn how they were defining feminism and to work around those definitions? And if so, how did you come to understand how they were holding feminism and feminist principles?
When I grew up, I was surrounded by Muslim people, right? So it was not difficult for me to understand Muslim women, to understand the religious background, and beliefs. And I always grew up embracing all religions. And, a lot of people in my family married Muslim people, so also converted to Islam. So I never saw Islam as a bad religion. I never saw Muslim people as troublemakers or, how the world is trying to portray them as terrorists or whatsoever. So it was not difficult at all for me to understand Rohingya women being Muslim women and the values that they hold. Because there are similar values in my families and Muslims in my family. And I think when we stand in solidarity with people, we don't impose what solidarity means, but we have to defer our power to those on the front line. So when we work, be it with Rohingya women or other Burmese youth, we always need to step back and ask them, okay, we have these funds that we can provide to you. What do you want to do with it? It's not for us to define the agenda for them, because we suffer so much from foreign agenda or from foreign donors wanting to tell us what to do. We cannot replicate the same mistakes when we are the ones, providing funds to groups on the ground. So for us, solidarity, it's a very important word. It's been a trending word. Everybody say, I'm standing in solidarity. I'm saying, but what does it really mean? It's how do you actually apply solidarity on the ground? And so it's really important for us that when we work with the Rohingya women or any other groups, that when we stand in solidarity with them, we understand solidarity following the 4Ds. And that's a theory that I learned because I've been working on the Symposium on Strength and Solidarity for Human Rights. And as part of this symposium, I'm one of the key moderators. And as part of this process of talking about solidarity and strength within the human rights field, we identified what are the key, what is the blueprint for solidarity that the global majority wants. And so what we realized is that in order for us to stand in solidarity, we need to the first D is difference. So it's essential that we defer power to those on the front line. So it's really important to whoever we support, we ask them, what do you want from us? And what do you need from us? How do you want us to show solidarity towards you? They need to tell us how they want us to defer power for them to decide what solidarity means to them. It's not for us to say, we have money, you have to do this. Or we are the saviors, you need to do this. No, we defer the power to you and you tell us exactly what you want from us. The second is differences. So you need to embrace differences, right? And I think this is critical when we stand in solidarity with any groups, especially the Rohingya community, that we embrace differences. And if we don't understand them, by embracing differences, we need to learn from them and ask them questions. And if you don't understand, you just need to ask questions and people explain to you so you can embrace differences. The third point is agreeing to disagree. So the third is disagreement. It's critical to agree to disagree, but in the end of the day, even if deep inside you disagree with the approach that the groups you're supporting, they want to take, you need to agree to disagree, because in the end of the day, you still need to go back to difference. Even if you disagree, you go back to difference, you defer the power to them. Even if you disagree with the approach, they're the ones deciding. So you need to agree to disagree. And the last point is decolonial. It has to be decolonial because it's not about us. It's not about people who think they have more knowledge or more power. It's about them in the end of the day. So you have to defer the power, embrace differences, agree to disagree. You have to apply a decolonial approach, which means that when you stand in solidarity and you create space for them, you need to make sure that they are the ones on the front lines, they are the ones leading, because you defer the power to them.
So it sounds like through that model, you're really walking the walk of not wanting to replicate those power structures just in different names and different backgrounds, of repeating those same structures of what came before it, because so often we see that in history, or people trying to change what came, the dynamics and power structures that came before them, they really just tear those down and then build some model that copies it and just puts them in a different place. And so it sounds like with this model, you're really holding yourself to certain standards of transparency, that you really are going to be doing things differently going forward with those marginalized, even more marginalized communities that you're supporting.
Yeah, and it's challenging because truly staying in solidarity, it's not easy. It means that when you're creating space for the most marginalized and you're creating space and visibility for them, they are now getting the attention of the diplomats. They are getting the attention of the donors. They are getting the attention of the international community. It's not going to make everybody happy. It's going to make those who used to get the attention unhappy. And I think this is what I don't like about our human rights field. It's actually the lack of true solidarity. It's people have issues with difference. I think the most difficult thing when you stand in solidarity is difference. People have issues deferring power to those on the front lines. They still think that people need to have the capacity built. They still think that people need them in a way. And I understand, like, everybody wants to feel relevant. Everybody wants to feel important. But we cannot ignore the world that we live in. We cannot ignore the fact that, the world is evolving and the world is changing, and there is more and more global majority people and people from the working class that is mobilizing to change the statu quo, and they need to accept that. And I've been attacked for so long, since I opened Manushya, because I'm disrupting the statu quo. I'm creating space for those who were not visible before, and I've been accused, of stealing funding. I've been accused of stealing space from the traditional human rights activists or NGOs, and I don't mind. They can attack me. I don't mind, because I know where I stand, and I know that I have been deferring power to those on the front line.
Right. And, also in your journey and your work, so the personal and the professional and the advocacy, it all blends together, and it's all, and these are, I think in these fields in general, often they are blurry lines of how we live our life and what we're doing and who we actually are. And so I'm also curious, just on a personal level, your engagement and growing friendship with Rohingya women and Rohingya activists, what have you learned from them personally? How have they inspired you personally?
They are so powerful. They are coming from a community that has been the most marginalized, and many of them, some of them have, Wewenu was in prison. She's a former political prisoner. Yasmin was living in Thailand for years before being resettled in the US. Yasmin was years in Malaysia, before being resettled in Australia. And you see those women who live several lives in one life. And the power of women's cycle coming together, building something together for the people, using their voice in the most powerful way, and not being scared. You know, for me, people may not see it, but I have a lot of fears. But I see them so fearless, and I'm like, you know, with everything that they went through, they are there. They're putting themselves out there. They have no issues being attacked. They have no issues being facing, you know, all those attacks from racists, from Burmese people who think that they are from the higher caste in Burma. Because what is the most important within them is that they never forget where they're coming from. And, you know, they are very well educated now. Like, they succeeded so much from the day they were born and had to flee Myanmar to today. Very well educated, so eloquent, so powerful, and they don't complain, you know, and they are doing that for their people because there's a genocide that needs to stop. And so often when I feel down and when I'm tired of the attacks of patriarchy, of people who are always trying to put you down when you're being successful, and then I look at them and I'm like, you know what? They are so powerful. They're putting themselves out there. They are not waiting for the perfect moment to do their advocacy. They just do it because they don't have any other choice. And I think it's really important for any woman or any young woman really to look up to them, because they're not waiting for the perfect moment. And I think this is what sometimes can stop people. It's when you wait for the perfect moment to start doing something. They had no other choice. They had to do something, and they did not wait for the perfect one. They go and take the space. They are putting themselves out there. Even though they're being attacked, they don't care. Every opportunity there is, they will get it so that people will know about the genocide against the Rohingya people. And I think this is exactly like, I'm sometimes like, wow, I wish I was as brave as them, because, and then when you look up to them, you're like, and then when you look up to the lions, you're like, wow, they are so brave and they are so powerful. And I don't think they realize that, you know. And I hope when they listen to the podcast, they can realize how they inspire me, and I'm a huge fan of them.
That's great, and it reminds me of you know, there's this narrative out there. Myanmar is going through this dark time. It's we say it's a failed country or a collapsed state, or that it's a place that deserves so much pity, and they've you know, it's really it's really this sad and depressing state. Oh, you can kind of go on and on. That's one narrative. That's one narrative that you can definitely find facts to fill that in. But there's kind of a narrative correction that I've had a campaign to want to start to change, and that's that. As I talk to different activists and other people that are engaged, not just activists, you know, scholars, journalists, diplomats, authors, artists, whoever we've had on that are not Burmese. And one of the consistent things that we've heard is just how much, whether it's Rohingya or the Burmese youth, the Gen Z, or you know, ethnic Karen, or whoever activists and what they're doing, one of the consistent through lines that we've heard is just how inspired they are by what they have been doing and what they're doing now against the odds that they're facing. And it's this sense that, like, if they're able to mount this kind of creative resistance, and they're able to withstand this kind of pressure, and they're able to keep finding new ways to take on this bloodthirsty, tyrannical military regime that represents the worst of the worst things that we could ever conjure up, that if they're able to do this, they're an inspiration for us all. So there's this changing, this flawed narrative from being this place that's going towards darkness and devastation and destruction to, okay, yes, that's also there, but what's the flip side of that? The flip side is that it's brought out these gems. Maybe the pressure has created diamonds of the types of people that are doing things that we could barely imagine as being possible, and they're happening right in front of us. And so, you know, the more that we're talking to, especially regional activists, and, you know, I've done a lot of interviews with milk tea activists across the region, pretty much any country in the region, you name it, we've talked to some kind of activist there. And what really, and I guess I went into it a bit naive when I first started to talk to them and interview them, because I kind of had this impression that that through their solidarity it would be this sense of, oh, Myanmar's going through a hard time and it's kind of our job to be there for them and, to stand up and kind of support them as we can. Definitely that was all in there. That was one part of it. But I think my naivete was from this not so much understanding the reciprocal relationship between this. Because what's also come from that is this realization, this expression that they are leading the way. They are doing things that I only could dream of in our country, being able to find that courage, that community, that mindset, that solidarity. So like everything that they're doing, whether it's Thailand or Taiwan, whether it's Vietnam or Indonesia or the Philippines, you name it, there's just been this expression of, and this is flipping this flawed narrative, that it's not a place where everything bad is happening, we just have to pity it and give it things. It's a place that's giving us so much, that's showing us what's possible with the human spirit and what we can do in the face of the impossible, that we haven't even had to face even a minutia of what it is they're facing. And if they're doing that, then what can we do here? And so I think this is a really important messaging to get out, because it's true. It's something that is happening, and that is a way to correct this narrative of seeing this as just a place where everything is going wrong, and how can I do my part to help them? No, it's another side of that, how much we have to learn that they're doing things, whether it's from local governance or creative resistance or anything else, or solidarity or anything else, that they are doing things that we quite literally don't know how to or aren't capable of. And so really it's so much that we have to learn from them.
No, I totally agree. I last year, when before the USAID funding cuts, we were able to give grants to several Burmese groups, mainly youth groups. So the Rohingya Women Collaborative Network is one of them, but also A New Burma in Chiang Mai, amazing creative.
Yeah.
Like the art and the resistance in the art that they are producing with so little money.
Yeah.
It's mind-blowing. Of course, the Military Alliance Friends of Myanmar as well, we gave them a grant. And same thing is, I think people don't realize that when you have nothing, because a lot of those activists also grew up with nothing.
Yeah.
And when you have nothing, you're not scared of going back to nothing. And when you have nothing and you grow up poor or with very limited financial resources, you have no choice but to be creative. And if you look at people who succeed in the resistance, or even people who will be able to surface from the USAID drama funding cuts, all the people who are creative, all the people who started with nothing. And what I love when I see the Burmese youth and the Burmese activists really connects with how I grew up and the people I grew up with, is the spirit of resistance. It's never stop dreaming, never stop believing in yourself, never stop believing that you will be able to bring the change. And when you grow up with nothing and you have nothing, it takes you nothing, just a little bit, to be creative and bring the change. And I think this is a luxury that people coming from a very wealthy, privileged background will never get to experience. Yeah. Because they grow up with so much privileges and so much that the day they lose the privileges is the end of the world, for them. For us, when you grow up with nothing, with just a little bit, you're able to bring so much change. And this is exactly what we are seeing with Burmese youth. This is exactly what we are seeing across the region with the Military Alliance. It's exactly what we are seeing with Rohingya women, with the Military Alliance Friends of Myanmar. It's like with just a little bit, they can do so much because of the creative mindset, the creative spirit, but also because they did not come from privilege. And so you have everything to build with your own hands, and you have all your mind to be creative.
And I think the other thing is that with what the Burmese have been facing in the last 4+ years, there is really every reason to give up and every reason not to go on. And the hardships that they've had to endure, the sacrifices they've had to make, and even that word, I say the word sacrifices, most Burmese friends correct me and say, please do not use that word when you're describing my actions. I am not sacrificing. This is a choice that I have so much pride and joy that I am making this choice. I am not sacrificing. even though from all intents and purposes, when you're seeing what they're having to do and what they're giving up, I don't know another word to say it, but I respect their agency to be able to use the words they want to describe what it is they're doing. It's still just remarkable to me. And when you look at just how little support they have and what they're facing and how easy it is to give up, and the fact that in so many ways, most of them unheralded, most of them unknown outside of their particular community, certainly not doing it for any kind of attention or or to draw or any kind of fame for what they're doing, really just to want to do it to support their community. And then when you look at causes and activists in other places, I mean, this is the highest live wire act you could find anywhere. The stakes are the highest, go across the board, whatever it is you're looking at, from gender equality to marginalized communities to crony capitalism and corruption, military police violence, religious freedom of the press. I mean, any category you look at, artistic freedom, any category you look at, these are the highest stakes and the most brutality with which they're facing it, and they're continuing to go out and resist day after day after day. And that comes from, living under that kind of regime for as long as they've had, and just knowing that there is no alternative to going back, that there is no other option to accepting another fate, because that's just resigning what future they could hope they have. So they have to there's something in the human spirit that just has to keep waking up day after day and say, I'm going to find another way to resist and another way to engage. And that is, that really is teaching and lighting up the world, or it should be. Those stories aren't being told and known as they should be. That's where we're hoping to bring more of them, and other programs and platforms trying to hopefully trying to bring those out and speak to the world, because they really do have something to offer each and all of us, whatever it is we're dealing with and wherever we are.
What really makes me what warms my heart when I see the Burmese resistance and the young people, the new generation, that is different from what I saw 10 years ago when I started working with Burmese leaders, is the mobilization of the working class. And I think that's really what makes the difference between before and now. It's the young people that you see fighting in the streets in Yangon that have been killed, that have been arrested, and those then who are mobilizing, in Thailand and globally. Is the mobilization of the working class. It's because the working class decided that we will be the one leading. They have been disappointed by Aung San Suu Kyi. They have been disappointed by the NLD, by the elite. It's the mobilization of the working class that is actually bringing the change. The mobilization of the working class anywhere in the world is going to bring change. And I think the Burmese activists are the ones showing us the example of what should be done in the US, what should be done in other places in the world that now, is getting worse and worse. Is we need the mobilization of the working class. And the young people are the ones representing the mobilization of that working class. And the Burmese activists are ahead of everyone else. And when I see them, be it through the Military Alliance or the youth group or Sister to Sister, it's really that mobilization of the working class and saying that we are doing with what we have, and we will mobilize, and we will fight back, and we will win. I hope all the movements elsewhere in the world are going to look up to them, really.
It should be a textbook, it should be something that's studied everywhere, what they're doing, and it's appreciated everywhere. But I do want to touch upon this thread that you've just referenced of the mobilization of the working class. That's a new element into this conversation that we haven't talked on before. And I know that you've also, that your work and your organization's work has also expressed concerns about hyper-capitalization that we're in, and certainly Myanmar with its natural resources, the crony capitalism that takes place there. Can you describe in some more detail and give some more examples of how this Burmese working class has been mobilized that you've seen?
A lot of Burmese activists that I know, even some that were working with us before of the USAID funding cuts, they're coming from poor backgrounds, Their parents were peasants or had no jobs, so they have always been the ones looking for jobs, to support their families. And so for them, joining an NGO or working for an NGO was a way to bring money to their family. For them, mobilizing and fighting for freedom in the country, fighting for democracy was also a way to bring the family out of poverty. So the mobilization of the working class are people who want to see another Burma. It's people who want to see better lives. So everyone in Burma, they are sick and tired of seeing their parents struggling. They grew up in poverty. And you know, when you grow up in poverty, you also face violence and domestic violence and so much trauma. What I find very, very admirative is that a lot of them went through so much trauma, be it within their families because they're coming from a poor background to the war, you know, and the coup. They have seen so much violence and trauma, and still they are coming back to themselves, and still they are resisting and they're mobilizing. And it's really the mobilization of people coming from a poor background and the working class because they want a better future for themselves and for their family. They had access to schools, they had access to education in a way that their parents did not before. They want another Burma. They have been disappointed by Aung San Suu Kyi. They're like, okay, this elite woman, she doesn't bring anything for us. They realize that they are the ones who need to bring nobody else is going to bring the change except themselves. And the fact that they are mobilizing across the country, and they are very, 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 really, really supporting each other. And they're building a new community wherever they are, be it in Chiang Mai or in Thailand or in other places in the world. They have this power of building a sense of collective and community that I find so beautiful. And I think you need to come from the working class to be able to do that because, you know, when you're growing up poor or from the working class, you live in community. Your parents are working, you rely on your neighbors. You live in community. When you're coming from privilege and a wealthy family, you are living a very individualistic life. So only people coming from the working class or marginalized communities will understand the necessity to be in community, will understand the necessity to mobilize as the working class because you grew up relying on your neighbors. You grew up relying on your community. Whereas when you grew up rich, you stay in your house, in your bedroom, very individualistic life. So it's very different. Like when you grow up being poor in the working class, living in community, being with the collective, it's how you grew up. You have no other choice. You just replicate the same thing then when you resist. You just replicate this. You understand that your leaders are not looking up to you. Your leaders are not representing you. They have to represent themselves. And that's what I love about the mobilization of the working class and what is happening with the Burmese youth. And those who have been working with me is like, this person grew up so poor and look at where they are and I'm just in awe, you know, in front of many of them. They're so smart, they're so strategic. And I think that's really important to understand that being smart, being strategic has nothing to do with the degrees that you have. Has nothing to do with the school you went.
Right.
And I think that's my generation growing up, we had to prove ourselves. We had to go to the best schools, you know, growing up poor, you had to end up in the best schools, you had to prove yourself with the best degree. They don't need to do that. They know the power, you know. They know the power so well, they're like, you know, I don't need to follow the conditioning or the matrix that the society wants me to follow. I'm going to resist at the working class and I'm not trying to become something else than the working class. And I think this is where the power lies with them. They represent the working class, they're mobilizing as the working class, and they're proud of themselves. They're not trying to be something else.
Yeah. Well, I think this is also where it goes into this concept of rule of law and if we're actually playing under fair rules. And I don't know if you could point to a country in the world that, you know, has totally fair rules that you play in. This is maybe just the complexity and the conundrum of human society that we're always trying to get to and never quite there. However, certainly there are some countries where the unfair rules are much, much more severe. And Myanmar has been one of those places. But I think that when you approach a system thinking that there are fair rules, you try to understand what those rules are and play by them the best you can. And that means going to the good schools and getting the good jobs and having the good resumes and qualifications and doing right by that way, thinking that you work well within the system and the system will work for you. And to some degree, there's some truth in that. When you can trust on rule of law and that a system can, you know, no system is perfect, but when there are ways that it does work the way it's supposed to, then you can you can live according to expecting it to work that way. But when it starts to not do that, which is certainly the case for marginalized communities in America as well, but in Myanmar, so much of that system has not worked for so long, and no one really trusts to play by the rules of the game because the rules are unfair and they're always changing, and the law is a weapon used to wield against the marginalized from the elites in any way they choose to, without rhyme or reason. And so if you're trying to approach the rules of the game by playing within the game, you're always going to lose. I mean, I think this is a side note, but I think this is one of my criticisms of why the resistance as of now is so ineffective in America, is they don't quite realize that they're trying to play by rules of the game, that in a system that the other side has changed, and they don't quite realize that it's a new game there.
Yeah.
But going back to Myanmar and looking at what's happening in Myanmar, I think that for some time, and certainly today, activists realize that they need to engage in some way, some creative way outside these rules that were never meant to be followed fairly. And because doing so will not get them anywhere. And so I think once you adapt that mindset, it can be a bit scary at first, because rules and law and systems and structures, they can ground you and help you know what you just have to follow this line. And yes, this is hard, but I know what I have to do. And if I don't do it, then it's on me that I wasn't able to succeed, because I know what I'm supposed to do and I give my best effort. However, when that system isn't there, it can be scary. It can also be liberating, and realizing that there is nothing holding you back. And I think that's what we are seeing from this generation of Burmese activists and the wider milk tea activists, that they are really key and alert in identifying those unfair systems. And why are we trying to align ourselves with an unfair system that will never reward us, no matter how we follow it? And so what ways can we be outside of that to creatively be able to attack from the sides, to be able to seek our protections and our rights and aspire to the systems that we want, by not following these unfair rules that had been placed in the first place.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
The disruption that they are creating, that is outside of the box, because they are so creative. They are, as you said, it should be a textbook, for everyone. And when we look at the US, the American dream, everybody was trying to live the American dream, this free country where you can have your dream achieved. Like you can be poor and become rich, you can be from any color. And then we realize that it's not true, especially when you see what's happening to the Black community in the US. And I think when you're living in the global minority, there's so much hypocrisy because of the way that media is being controlled, that the narrative that is being shaped into people's mindset they will always be able to control people in the global minority now, because the elite is controlling the media. The elite is controlling everything. What is happening though in the global majority is that the elite is trying to control, but people are resisting. Right? Even if the elite is controlling the media or everything in Laos or in Burma, in Vietnam, in Cambodia, people have been fighting against that for generations and for decades, because they have never had that freedom.
That's right.
And so now we see the world that is flipping around, where the global minority will have to learn about tactics from the global majority to be able to resist against authoritarianism.
Absolutely. Right. So you've been following and standing in solidarity with Rohingya and Rohingya women for some time. I'm curious if after the coup, you saw some shift or change in the way that the Rohingya cause and Rohingya women were able to come in concert with Bamar and other activists in greater solidarity than came before.
When the coup happened, the Rohingya communities and Rohingya women stand in solidarity with Burmese, right? It was everybody being impacted by the coup. So it was very normal and very human for the Rohingya women, the Rohingya community, to stand in solidarity with all Burmese people against the coup. And I think by having the Rohingya women and Rohingya community standing in solidarity as one unified movement against the coup, it allowed them, to be a part of one movement against the coup, as part of resisting the junta in Myanmar. What I saw, though, working with the Military Alliance and different youth groups, is that the Rohingya women, they still need to show up. They need to show up everywhere for the issue not to be excluded. And I think even though you're working with young people, even though you're working with the working classes, because they have been in Burma, they grew up in Burma, and they have been seeing this narrative for so long against the Rohingya people that if the Rohingya women don't show up in places with the Military Alliance and others, they might have the issues excluded. And so I remember we had a workshop with the Military Alliance last year where if Noor didn't show up, maybe the Rohingya issue would not be included in the priority of the Military Alliance. And I think it reminded me that the brainwashing and the narrative against the community is so strong that you always need to show up. And I think this is exactly what the Rohingya women are doing. Any opportunities they have, they are showing up because they are well aware of the narrative that is being spread through social media, through older generation of human rights activists who don't think that Rohingya people are part of the Burmese community. And it gets deep down into younger generation. If they don't show up, the issues are not being included. It's the same thing that I experienced 10 years ago, when if we don't show up, her issues may not be included. But you have Aung Myomin, back then, and Kinomar making sure that is being included. Now you have activists within the Military Alliance, Friends of Myanmar, making sure that those issues are being included and always making sure to bring them in. But I think, for the Rohingya women and the Rohingya community, there's no 100% win. They always have to show up to make sure that the issues are included within the broader Burma, Myanmar human rights movement against and dismantling and the military junta. They always need to show up to make sure that people are including them. And I don't know when it's going to stop. I don't know when will be the time where they will automatically be always included. I'm dreaming of a world, where the working class is leading. I'm dreaming of the world where the people from lived experience are leading the world. So we can shape and change the narrative of the world, because you always have to show up. You always have to be present, and sometimes it's tiring to always have to show up, to always have to be present. Otherwise, you get excluded. And this is the world we live in, sadly. And we need to build momentum of what is happening now in the world with the rise of fascism and the rise of working class mobilization. We need to keep pushing for working class mobilization, and we need to keep pushing for lived experience to lead the work that we do in the human rights field, because that's the only way that we will be able to shape people's mindset in the next decades moving forward. I'm dreaming of my team, or my children to be able to see a world where working class people and people from lived experience are leading the world, and where there's no more exclusion or people thinking that they are above the others just because they have money.
Right. What other ways has Manushya been involved with what's going on in Myanmar since the coup?
Again, standing in solidarity with the Military Alliance, standing in solidarity with the Rohingya women, being able to provide grants whenever we can, because, a lot of them are unregistered groups. So it's very difficult for them to access funding. So it was critical for us to be able to provide grants to Burmese activists in a very decolonial way. We need to understand that the way that the development aid has been working is very colonial. Donors have been imposing very bureaucratic processes on groups. And those bureaucratic processes stop communities and stop Burmese activists from getting those funding. And how do you want to sustain? How do you want to mobilize if you don't have the necessary funds to do so? So it's been very important for Manushya to be able to channel funds to activists on the ground, to Burmese groups, to sustain the movements and give them core funding. Like, we are not telling them, come up with a project. We are not telling them, you need to submit a financial report, you need to submit a narrative report. We are telling them, here is the money for you to do whatever you need to do so that you can mobilize and you can fight against the junta. At Manushya, we will take care of the rest. We will take care of the bureaucratic processes, and we will be the one reporting back for the donors for you. But we don't want you to change. We don't want you to become an NGO. We want you to remain your, unregistered movement, and we want you to keep fighting against the junta. So that's what a big way for us to show solidarity is by channeling the colonial grant making and decolonial funding to Burmese groups on the ground for them to decide whatever they want to do with the money so they can fight, and mobilize.
And I know, like many groups, Manushya, as well as all of those organizations and informal communities that you support, has been so impacted by these U.S. aid cuts. And so, and as with many, are looking for creative options of how you can get the support and find new ways to be able to keep the programs going. So I just like to allow you to make a pitch for the work you're doing for our listener base, and to describe what you're trying to do in terms of the support you're keeping up, what you would like to do, and hopefully some listeners out there might be able to support that.
No, thank you for giving me the space to explain the work that we do. So the support that we provide to activists on the ground, it's really about decolonizing aid. It's really about decolonizing development. It's, if we want activists to be able to thrive, if we want activists to be able to mobilize and resist, authoritarianism, if we want activists to have space to come together, to think about tactics and strategize on how they are going to fight against authoritarianism and the junta, we need funds to be able to do that. And we need to make sure that the funds that we give them comes without any strings attached. We mean that we just give them the funds, and people need to trust that activists on the ground are so smart, they know how to use the money. Nobody's corrupted and nobody is going to use the money badly. When you are fighting against authoritarianism and when you want to bring change, you're not going to do the wrong thing. And so it's really important for the people listening to understand that it would be great if they could support us, moving towards this decolonization of aid, because activists on the ground have no time to submit reports to donors. Activists on the ground don't want to register as an NGO. Yeah. Activists on the ground just need the funds that go into their hands so they can rent a house, they can pay for lawyer's fee, they can pay for bail if they get arrested, they can pay for food, when they're hiding. For the Rohingya community, they can pay for Rohingya women who have been raped to receive, the medical support that they need to be able to deliver healthy babies as well. So it's really about life savings support that we're no longer able to provide to those activists. It's really about the money that we need to channel to them so they can, hide, survive, protect themselves, eat, mobilize, strategize, all of this without any string attached to it, without any colonial processes upon it. That's the support that we were providing, and that's the support that doesn't exist anymore because of the USAID funding cuts.
Right, and so listeners can search Manushya on all social media platforms as well as the website. And of course, in episode show notes and on our website, we'll have all the relevant links and tags and everything else, so you could find it that way. So definitely encourage those listeners that are inspired by what you're hearing to even make a small difference in being able to continue to support that.
Yeah, thank you so much. Please reach out.
Mm-hmm. So Emilie, thank you so much for joining us and telling your story and the story of Manushya and how you've been engaging in Burma during this time.
I think it was a great conversation. Thank you so much for inviting me on your podcast. And I really, really hope that people are going to resonate, especially with what is happening in the world, that people are going to tune more and more into your podcast, because there's so much wisdom and so much to learn from the Burmese activists and movement.
Thank you for being a part of this conversation and standing in solidarity with the people and the stories shared here. At Insight Myanmar Podcasts, solidarity is not just a word, it's the foundation of everything we do. Each voice we amplify and every story we share represents a call to stand together with those in Myanmar. And so it is through the act of listening, reflecting, and engaging that you become part of this collective effort to uphold dignity, amplify truth, and stand firm for what matters. And I should also add that all of this work is only made possible because of listeners like you who have chosen to offer a contribution. Every donation is an act of standing together, of refusing to turn away, and of reinforcing the bonds that connect us across borders and experiences. If you believe in the power of solidarity and the importance of sharing these stories, we invite you to join us by making a donation. Your support helps us to keep this platform alive and ensure that those voices continue to be heard. Visit insightmyanmar.org/donation to join us in standing with Myanmar.